Turbo Conquering Mega Eagle. How you doing, folks? In this video I will show you how I refinished my boot patcher. By refinishing, I'm not just referring to applying a nice coat of paint to the frame, but also taking the rough machined surfaces and, where necessary, removing burrs and polishing to produce a low friction surface which will require less oil, making the machine easier to operate and producing less dirt, which will also make it cleaner and easier to clean. The frame of the machine, cam wheel, bobbin arm I think, and the head of the machine are mostly grey iron castings which have received various machining operations and in some cases finished to a smooth surface to prevent snagging, like the bobbin arm. The needle and foot operating arms amazingly appeared to be hand forged from scrap, with the ends of them being either flame cut or hot cut, and hot cut I suppose. You know, the ends are finished differently. One's been cut with an acetylene torch and the other looks like it's been hot cut on an anvil by hand on that head. Some surfaces have been shone up a little bit, while the less visible surfaces, and more importantly the mating surfaces with the machine, are still covered in forge scale, which is quite abrasive and not really considered a low friction surface, as I'm sure you can imagine. The biggest surprise for me was the block to which the bobbin cam follower was attached, which was actually a closed die forged steel component. I can't think of any reason for such an expensive process to have been used other than it is a component already being manufactured for other uses which could be made to fit this machine. I started with the machine's frame, removing as much of the rough sandcast finish as possible on the belt grinder, and then moved to a carbide burr in the die grinder, removing the parting lines in the cast and as much of the roughness as I could, then moving on to a file. Cast iron can be very porous and really hold on to the oil or whatever muck is around it, so I used a liberal amount of degreaser and a pressure washer, followed by battery acid to etch, and then another rinse with the pressure washer and a wipe down with solvents. After masking off the bearing seats and mating surfaces, it got 6 coats of filler primer with rubbing down in between, and after that I decided it wasn't really going to get any better, so I applied a top coat of black. I'll add that the filler primer is incredibly porous stuff, so you need to do this away from the rest of the machine, away from any oil or anything like that, because a little drop on filler primer and you've really got to sand right back to bare material to get rid of it all again. And when you start sanding filler primer that has oil in it, it just spreads it around and impregnates it into the rest of the filler primer. So cleanliness is next to godliness as far as paint is concerned, as always, as I'm sure you know. The hand forge arms were heavily reworked to allow for the installation of bronze bushes. I will cover that in another video, but the arms themselves were sculpted with the belt and die grinders, then finished working up the grades with sandpaper to 500 grit. Gives a nice pleasant satin finish without too much effort on my part. You know, I always prefer a polished finish, but I think this is satisfactory in this case, as there's still pits in the arms, so you know, it's good enough, good enough. But a polish would have been easy at this point, because I could have just taken it to the wheel and yeah, maybe gone up to 1,000 grit. But I don't have any 1,000 grit paper, so that's why I didn't get polished. Basically, the bobbin carrier and drive were first sanded down with 500 grit paper to remove the black carburized factory dirt, and then further attention was given to the burrs and sharp edges left from manufacture. Of particular concern were those left in the gullets of the rack's teeth. I actually ended up beveling all the teeth over slightly, intentionally, it wasn't a mistake, in order to get some clearance in between the teeth and the track that it runs in. You should always have a bit of clearance on racks, because wear causes further burring, and you know, where you might have clearance on a new item, wear can very soon lead to further binding. So I just took the edges off, which won't affect their engagement with the bobbin carrier at all. The forged cam follower block, which actuates the bobbin, was polished, but unfortunately, due to an already loose fit in the machine frame, I felt any attempt to clean up the rough machined mating surfaces in the frame itself would have led to excessive radial play and potential malfunctions. It is my intention to carry out further work in this area at a later date. It is also my intention to remanufacture much of the swivel head, which is why at this time I just carried out what I considered to be the bare minimum of work. This included the removal of factory dirt and grease and grime, and polishing the two flat operating bars, with particular attention paid to the wedge which the wedge which the wedge which advances the foot. This was first filed and then smoothed with paper. It almost left teeth, the cutter which had made that wedge, and it has to engage with a cast iron corner on the lower portion of the head, and you know, in the short amount of time I've been using the machine, it had already chunked itself a fair old bite off it. Not a good choice of materials. It's almost an impacting motion when that hits, so cast iron really should be avoided. It might be nice to inlay a bit of higher carbon steel, but as I said, I'm going to replace this in the future. I don't normally advocate the use of aerosol lubricants, but in the case of the China Patcher straight from the manufacturer, there are so many contaminants in the various joints that unless you're planning on completely stripping it, I think it's a good idea to dump an entire can of squirt into the head, cam wheel tracks and bobbin bar to flush the shit and corruption out of the machine, as there's so much gritty swarf in it from new. Realistically, the repaint and sculpting of the arms are not at all necessary. However, I would strongly recommend the other steps in this video. I don't consider it modifying, more finishing off the manufacturing process, as the work done to these machines really is just the bare minimum to get it working. You'll probably notice that I've adorned this machine in little brass trinkets. There really is no reason for this other than aesthetics. I don't like the stamped the stamped steel visually, but it was functioning perfectly fine. However, I got carried away, and you know, seeing as I was replacing some of the hardware on this machine with brass bits, like the nice dome nuts that cover up the ends of the steel threads in certain areas, and and brass screws. I continue this, and the dipper that was previously a cadmium plate pressed steel item, I made a new one out of brass. I didn't like the bird shape, to be honest, but again, that's just my preference and really makes no difference to the functioning of the machine. Same with the winged lever for swiveling the head. Absolutely no reason for doing this other than aesthetics. You know what, the idea is you're going to make something nice out of the leather, and it's nice to do it with something that looks nice in the first place. Hopefully that makes sense. My missus was actually reading an old sewing manual that was produced by Singer, and it talked about the importance of everything looking nice, which makes your sewing nice. I suppose that goes for a lot of jobs, not always, but I think it said that it's really important to do your hair and put a nice dress on before you start sewing. So I've got a nice dress that I like to wear, but I don't like to do it on a machine. I'm only joking. I don't wear a dress. I wear a bikini. Anyway, I'm getting carried away now. Sorry. I hope you enjoyed this video, and it was both helpful and enjoyable. And you'll check out my other China Patcher videos and subscribe to see future modifications and work I'm doing with this machine, and all the other fun stuff that I have on my channel. Alright, take care folks, bye bye.